Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast. Now, the pursuit of a longer, healthier life often involves dietary choices. One dietary approach that has amassed significant attention for its health benefits is the DASH diet. So we have nutrition education consultant Rachel Schichtl here with us today. She is returning. She actually recorded a podcast with us a few weeks ago, and together we'll be examining the science and nutritional principles behind this popular diet. Prior to her consultancy practice, she spent time as a dietetics professor at the University of Central Arkansas. So we're extremely fortunate to have us return to share her wisdom with us. So hi, Rachel. Thanks for joining the show.
Hi, yes, thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Did you do something with your hair, by the way?
I do. I have bangs now. I got my bangs cut.
Yeah, I was thinking you look so different, and I was wondering if it was just me or something like that. It looks really good on you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we begin, could you tell us a bit about the DASH diet? What does the acronym DASH stand for?
Yeah, so DASH is DASH, and it's the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. So, of course, we know hypertension is high blood pressure. And so this is kind of just the dietary approach, like the acronym says, to kind of help with that. So,
Right. And with hypertension, does this condition lead to other medical issues?
yeah, so hypertension, when you have high blood pressure, you're more likely to be at risk for stroke, for cardiovascular diseases, for conditions like that. And so we want to make sure that we have a healthy blood pressure.
Right. And it's great that there's some sort of system that we can, like, dietary wise to use to potentially prevent that from happening in our later years, or at the very least, limiting it from happening. But before we go any further into what this diet entails, I would love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Rachel? And the first question I have for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Okay. I like to cook. I like to read. I'm always reading. I like to travel. I'm always trying to plan our next trip. So, we were kind of talking beforehand about kind of what I do in my spare time. And I have 3 children, and each time one graduates high school, we try to plan a really fun trip. So right now, we're gearing up for my second daughter. We're going to Scotland. And so we're planning that and reading all the things and all that. So I love to read about travel. I love to travel, those sorts of things.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Scotland seems beautiful.
Yeah, we've never been. So we try to go somewhere we've never been before. So yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, so what are some of the highlights that you foresee happening during the Scotland trip? Are you guys visiting old castles and stuff like that?
Yes. So my daughter wanted specifically some old castles and medieval type things and Highland cows, the cute little fuzzy cows that are in the Scottish Highlands, and also Loch Ness. So the lake where the Loch Ness monster lives. She wants to go visit that.
Oh, that's so cool. I remember being obsessed with that lake when I was younger.
Yes.
And,
Yes, so was I.
yeah. And medieval stuff too, of course. Every girl kind of dreams about living in medieval times.
Yeah, and I've never been, of course, but I hear that the landscape is just beautiful and it's just really nice. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. And as for cooking, which you mentioned that you like to do in your spare time, as well. What are some of your favorite dishes to whip up?
Well, I like to preserve food. I think we talked about this last time a little bit, but like canning things right now in the United States, we're in the middle of gardening season. So we have lots of peppers and tomatoes, and my apples did really well this year. So I put up a lot of applesauce and apple pie filling, and then had a lot of baked goods with apples in them. So yeah, I just like to kind of use what we have and make good, good recipes for my family.
Yeah, I actually remember us talking about it in the the last episode that we recorded as well. And I was pretty amazed by how you guys just whip things up from scratch and kind of manage the farm. Are there any times, I mean, as someone who is from the city, I rely so heavily on processed foods and convenience stuff sometimes. Are there any points at all where you're like, oh, I'm out of this thing, and I need to think about a way to substitute this ingredient now? How do you manage those challenges?
Well, one thing that a lot of people do, if you live in a rural area, which we do, we have deep freezers, which are big freezers where we can store, food and just hope that the power, electricity doesn't go out so that that won't spoil. But we just have good pantries and good kind of stock up food so that we don't have to run to town every time we need anything. So I keep, we hunt deer, and so we have lots of venison that we process ourselves. There's a local farmer down the road that I buy my chicken from, and so I buy it in bulk and freeze it. And so you kind of just have to start with the basics, and then anything that we have fresh, you'll put that in, and then keep some staples like beans and rice and lentils and canned fruits and veggies and things. Yeah, because you don't want to have to run to town all the time. That gets expensive.
Yeah, that's really cool. And what is your approach like with you and the kids when it comes to dietary preferences and stuff like that as someone who is very much working in that?
Yeah. So I have three kids, and each child really just had a different preference for the things that they wanted. My first and oldest daughter, I wouldn't say she was picky, but she certainly had things that she liked more than others. My second daughter literally would eat anything from the time she was born. Very, I guess, brave about her food choices. She would try anything, lots of different um, culturally appropriate foods and things. So always cooking up something different for her. But as far as, like getting them to eat it, we would have a nice meal around the table, and we would try to model, how do we behave at dinner time? How do we behave at the table? Talking to them about how food gives us fuel and how it can taste good, and it's a time for fun. But also, it's what makes us run fast and be able to jump high and have strong muscles. And so kind of framing it in that way so that, we eat the foods that are going to give us that fuel we need.
Yeah, and it's really important to start from young as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So ever since, they were old enough to sit in a high chair, they would sit at the table with us, and they would have whatever it was we were having. Of course, we would puree it or whatever they needed, depending on what stage they were at. But yeah, they just kind of grew up eating all the things. I have one memory of my middle daughter, and my dad always had a big green patch, like collard greens or mustard greens. I don't know what you have over there, but then over here we boil them and then you eat them, warm. But when she was tiny, my dad would give her some on her spoon, and she loved it. And she would just go crazy over this green juice. It was so crazy because it was just, like boiled collard greens, but she loved it. She acted like it was ice cream or something.
Yeah, that's adorable. And kids don't yet have this idea in their head of like what's good food and what's bad
Sure.
food. I remember when I was a child, I used to eat edamame, the
Oh, yeah.
Japanese pea thingy, by the bowl. Like
Oh,
we'd
yeah.
go to restaurants and my parents would have to order that for me. And as an adult, I think when I grew up, and I was kind of restricted to healthy foods or good foods, the more I craved unhealthy foods because I had so little exposure to it. and I completely stopped eating edamame. And now it's like I only ever eat it maybe once every few years when I'm craving some kind of Japanese stuff. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting how like all these different approaches to dietary stuff would affect a child, and different children would get affected by it differently as well. Anyway, before we get too far off track, let's jump right into the interview. How does that sound?
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, yeah. So for starters, how would you define longevity?
So, longevity really, I think to me, is more about not how many years you live, but really the quality of those years. And so, when we think about the average life expectancy for men and women, and of course, they're different based on where you live and countries and all of that, but not just how long you live, but really making sure that those latter years are really full and you have good, cognitive abilities, you're mobile, you can get around, you can care for yourself, you're independent, and you can do those activities of daily living. So it's more about the quality of your years rather than just having more of those years.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail right on the head there. It's very similar to how, like, for example, with the COVID vaccine, it wasn't just to prevent COVID, it was also to ensure that if you do get COVID, it would be a lot more bearable and less severe. Which I know is a pretty weird parallel to draw, um, pretty weird connection to draw because it sounds so far off. But yeah, I somehow just linked the two. But with the DASH diet, what are the key components of this dietary approach that um, promotes longevity?
Mm-hmm. So the DASH diet really promotes, like we talked about earlier, that lowering of your blood pressure. And so as we get older and we have higher blood pressure, we're more at risk for chronic diseases like stroke, heart attacks, cardiovascular diseases, even obesity. So as we talk more about the DASH diet, we'll talk about, some of the components of the foods that you're going to eat while on the DASH diet and how it's kind of a lifelong approach. But, it's really good to just kind of maintain that healthy body weight. So lots of things, preventing of those chronic illnesses as well as preventing obesity as we get older.
Right. So, in terms of longevity, how does the DASH diet compare to other dietary guidelines, such as the Mediterranean diet or intermittent fasting, for example?
Mm-hmm. So the Mediterranean diet actually is fairly similar. There are some differences which we may get into later, but really it's kind of just like it says, it's an approach. And so when you think about all the different recommendations here in the United States, we have My Plate, and we have the dietary daily recommended intake, and the daily values, and the RDA, and all these different things, all these different recommendations for a healthy diet. That's really what the DASH diet is. It's just making sure that the foods we're eating are promoting a healthy lifestyle, which is also what the Mediterranean diet does as well. Intermittent fasting really doesn't have that focus on reducing blood pressure. And while it could possibly reduce your blood pressure depending on how you approach it, that's not really the focus. And it's kind of the same for the Mediterranean diet. If you follow the Mediterranean diet and eat the foods on it, you probably are going to have lower blood pressure, but that's not really the focus. And so the DASH diet's more tailored towards that kind of prevention of high blood pressure or treatment if you already have it.
Right. So, tell us a little bit more about the scientific evidence that supports the DASH diet.
Yeah, so a lot of the evidence comes from a group of researchers that developed the diet and, started publishing, I guess, the late 90s, perhaps. And since then, there's been like 6,000 citations of it, and just really looking at this trial of people and, the effects of what happens when they follow this certain dietary approach. And so it's pretty well studied. It has a lot of really good outcomes on specifically reducing blood pressure.
So, tell us a little bit about the foods in the DASH diet and how they impact blood pressure.
So one of the main components of the DASH diet is we're wanting to reduce the overall sodium intake in our diet. And we know that sodium is in a lot of processed foods and things that, probably we shouldn't be eating in much anyway. But the overall approach is going to be things like 4 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, lots of fiber, lots of vitamins and minerals that are in those. Lower fat, milk, dairy, cheese, yogurt products, whole grains, brown rice, whole grain breads, whole grain tortillas, whatever it is that we're eating, lean proteins. And so not as much red meat, but leaner proteins, including poultry, chicken, turkey, even plant-based proteins that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, well, my next question was actually going to be about what the common challenges are when people try to adhere to the DASH diet. But as someone who doesn't really pick a dietary approach or anything and just goes by general trying to eat leaner meats and trying to incorporate a little bit more fruits and vegetables. I'm just gonna say veggies, fruits and veggies. um, it already sounds like a huge struggle to me to go from my regular diet to the DASH diet just because of the sheer volume of fruits and veggies I'm meant to eat. So, what advice do you have for that? I imagine it's not an uncommon struggle.
Yeah. So I think, fruits and vegetables in general, if you have fresh available to you, that's wonderful. So eat all the fresh fruits and veggies, but you also could have frozen fruits, just make sure there's nothing added. Sometimes they might add additional ingredients that you don't want. But when they have frozen fruit, they pick it fresh when it's at the peak ripeness, they flash freeze it, and it's really quite healthy for you. And so I think sometimes we get in our mind that we only need to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. And while they certainly have our place, you can do canned fruits or vegetables. Again, vegetables, you need to look to make sure there's no added sodium because that's the whole point. But, if you don't have fresh fruits and vegetables around you all the time, that's okay. There's other options. And think about, the things you do like. Don't just force yourself to eat fruits and vegetables because you need 4 or 5 servings a day. Think about what you like. Do you like a banana with your toast in the morning? Do you like green beans with dinner? Don't force yourself to eat fruits and vegetables you don't like just for the sake of that because you're going to burn out quickly. So, maybe make a list of the fruits and vegetables you do like and try to just incorporate those throughout the day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. However, I think another struggle that I probably have, you know what? This makes a lot of sense because I love salt. That is another huge struggle. And the thing is that seasoning food is so vital in cooking. It's such a huge thing. Always season your pasta water and all that kind of stuff. So how much regulation is needed on that front if the whole point of the DASH diet is to cut back on sodium?
That is a huge struggle and one that a lot of people face. And so a lot of times when I'm working with clients, I'll say, leave that salt shaker in the cabinet. Like, we're not putting it on the table. I know. But I think something more practical is to get some salt substitutes. And so there are different salt substitutes that are no sodium. And here, in the United States and maybe other places, we have a brand called Mrs. Dash's seasoning. And it's similar to salt. I know that if you're used to salt, it's not the same thing, but it does give some additional flavor. There's actually entire kind of branches of nutrition now called culinary medicine, where they're just teaching people how to flavor their food with herbs and spices. Some good Italian seasoning and parsley and things like that can really flavor up your food, and you may not need as much salt. And so, really just keep sodium or salt rather to those things that you may need in a recipe. For example, it has a very specific purpose if you're baking bread or something like that. But otherwise, try to see if there's alternatives to flavoring your food besides just, a salt shaker.
Right. So would like Parmigiano Reggiano work as a good substitute?
Actually, it's pretty high in
Oh
sodium.
no. Oh.
Yeah, that cheese is.
Ah.
But maybe some other source of cheeses perhaps that aren't aren't that. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but you could probably do some sort of softer cheese. We eat a lot of goat cheese. It just seems to have a flavor that we like, and those sorts of things. You can look on the back of, if you're doing cream cheese for a bagel or something, learning to read nutrition labels is really important. But yeah, lots of fresh herbs and those sorts of things are really going to add flavors. Onions, peppers, garlic, those sorts of things. And then some of those more exotic ones too, rosemary, thyme, dill, all give a great flavor.
Yeah. Well, and I am a huge user of MSG.
Okay.
Love it in my fried rice and whatnot. I think it brings incredible flavor. But where does MSG stand in this?
Well, I think to understand that, it's important to know what MSG stands for, which is monosodium glutamate. So
Yep.
it even has sodium in the name. And so, yeah, you'd have to figure out something outside of that to flavor I'm thinking probably like your noodles and rice is what you use MSG for mainly. So, yeah, maybe not
This
that.
this is actually heartbreaking.
Yeah, I'm
But
so sorry. You'll never ask me back.
no, I will definitely ask you back. I mean, like, you know, it is heartbreaking, but at least it's memorable. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
the day that my dreams of having MSG for life got crushed.
yeah.
Yeah, this is the day. But on a more general level, what advice do you have for effectively incorporating this diet into daily life? Would you recommend a cold turkey like immediate switch, or a more gradual one?
Yeah, I think that probably what we eat in our everyday lives, we can just think, is there something that I could eat a little bit different? So in the mornings, if I'm used to having white toast, would I be willing to make whole grain toast and have that as part of my diet? If I'm used to buying, let's say, a canned soup, maybe look at the same brand or the same flavor of canned soup, but look for a lower sodium version. So, really just looking at labels and thinking about if there's an alternative to that food that would be better for me, and not just totally changing your entire diet, but maybe looking at some substitutes or replacements for things that you already know how to cook, know how to enjoy, and then see if there's a lower sodium or, a healthier option for those things.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I suppose going half the way is better than not at all. So trying it out is not going to hurt. I actually did try out whole grain pasta recently, which isn't so bad at all. I'm not sure like how good of a substitute it is to regular pasta. But I had it in my pantry just sitting there because I've been meaning to try it out for a really, really long time. And I only realized like recently after a good few months that I haven't tried it out yet. And so I tried it out this week and I actually really enjoyed it.
Good. Yeah, so whole grain pasta has a little different texture, but if you're used to it, it's probably fine. But higher in vitamins, some of them are even enriched, so they even have more vitamins, they have more fiber. So yeah, if you can make little changes like that, that's certainly a good start. I know that a lot of processed foods that you use as recipe bases, or at least I do, things like veggie broth, chicken broth, those cream of whatever soups, a lot of those are really, really high in sodium. And so either learning how to make those yourself or looking for the lower sodium or no sodium added versions of those can make a big difference and really not change your overall eating habits that much, but just making some of those changes.
Right. So in general, or like in summation, how would you describe the intensity to which we should be practicing the DASH diet? Like, is it vital that we implement the DASH diet very strictly in our lives, or would doing sort of like you know um a general guideline for life, but one like a couple of meals here and there, you cheat a little bit, so-called cheat's not the right word to use, I'm aware, but sort of break out of that approach a little bit, how okay is that?
Yeah, so it's like every other diet, it's moderation. And so, one day it's not going to do anything. But over time, if we have these habits, that's where we're going to see a difference. And, there's all kinds of all other environmental factors that can impact our blood pressure. We know that exercise, stress, we were talking about all these things, sleep earlier. You were talking about how your previous guest talked about sleep. So all these different things can impact our blood pressure, not just diet, but diet certainly is a big one. And so, you may have some environmental factors where you're prone to higher blood pressure. You may have some hereditary type factors where you may have higher blood pressure. So certainly I think we all need to control our blood pressure, right? So that's important. But, some of us may need to a little bit more than others. And if we're at a healthy weight and if we're exercising and if we have good blood pressure, it's probably because we're doing some of these things anyway. But if we go to the doctor and they say our blood pressure's a little high and, maybe coming home and starting some of these changes, starting to walk a little bit more, moving our body a little bit differently than we've been used to, hopefully we'll start to see that blood pressure go down.
Right. That is a strong hope for me. I have been having hypertension. Well, actually, I don't know if this is a good thing to proclaim, but I have been suffering from a little bit of hypertension here and there since I was like in my late teens, which is really, really bad. I'm not sure if it's an environmental thing because I did grow up in Singapore, which is really hot and humid. So maybe that exacerbated that a little bit. But anyway, that's besides the point. Trying to do that. So whole grain pasta, less salt. Yes, I think I can do less salt. I don't think I can do like fully no salt, but I think I can do less salt for now. How would you how would you say, like, is that a good starting point of just going like, let's cut back a little bit on the salt for now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something's better than nothing all the time, no matter what kind of health behavior we're talking about. And so I think a lot of times it kind of snowballs. So you start thinking, oh, I really like whole grain pasta and I know it's really good for me. And I know that that fiber is helping me feel better. So maybe now I'll try a whole grain bagel. Maybe now I'll try a whole grain flour and, bread. And so I think we start to kind of think that. And when we start to see positive results, we'll start, thinking to ourselves, oh, this lower sodium veggie broth I use in my recipe, it's really not any different than, the full sodium that I'm used to using. So I'll just keep using that. So yeah, I think it kind of snowballs when we start having these healthy habits and we start to see that there's a difference in the way that we feel, the way that our maybe, numbers are. If we're talking about things like blood pressure or our lipid panels when we go to the doctor, once we kind of start to see those changes, I think it just encourages us to do more. So absolutely, small changes are changes and they're in the right direction.
Right. So overall, in the dietary research sphere, are there any emerging trends that you foresee that may inform future recommendations for longevity?
That is a great question. So, I'm not really sure what, we always have fad diets, and every fad diet, there's always something that says it's going to prevent this, prevent that. But as far as actual research studies, I think that we're seeing more studies into antioxidants, phytochemicals, phytonutrients. There's actually been quite a bit of research, about things like blueberries and how they can help to prevent cancers and all sorts of things. And so looking at those antioxidants, which is what's, really found in blueberry, looking at resveratrol, which is found in the skin of grapes and how it might impact us, looking at different foods and different dietary approaches that may actually help to slow or prevent Alzheimer's disease. That's something that they're really starting to study. And I think when we're talking about longevity, that's important. If we can prevent or delay or lessen the impact of Alzheimer's disease through our food, that's great. I mean, that's amazing. That's really going to cause a lot of families, a lot less heartache and trouble. And so there is some really good research right now about all those different things, the gut flora, the microbiome of our body. I mean, just lots of things out there that I think are heading in the direction to really make sure that our bodies are healthier longer.
Yeah. And how important is it, do you think, to pay attention to one's family medical history in order to learn a bit better about what what diets they should incorporate into their lives.
Yeah, so there's a whole branch of nutrition research and medical research called nutrigenomics, where it actually looks at your gene profile and takes into account, not only that, but also your family history, your medical history, to see if there are certain things you should be avoiding, certain things you should be eating, just kind of looking at that history. And so nutrigenomics is something that you're really going to start seeing a lot more of. We've already heard, quite a bit about it, but gene therapy, genetic counseling for different disorders, but medical history in particular, yeah, it's really important to know, your parents' medical history. If they had certain types of cancers, then there's different screening mechanisms in place. If, for example, if your mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 40, then it's recommended that, her daughters start getting screened even earlier than the recommended 40. I think typically it's about 10 years younger. And so knowing that type of medical history is really important to know that, if you're more at risk, there are things that we need to do, to prevent that.
Yeah, I agree. My mom actually got an early age stroke last year, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that our family wasn't very equipped with the knowledge. I believe my grandfather on her side, so her father had early age stroke as well, but we didn't really take away anything from that apart from like what to do during the recovery. We only really knew like, okay, um, well, he should be eating a little bit better or something like that. But we didn't really incorporate that into our lives either. And she ended up having a stroke early on as well. So now I imagine like if I, along with my parents, kind of try to change our diet a little bit, if I start earlier, that could help maybe prevent something like that for my future. And I imagine that's the same thing as well with other families with other genetic disorders that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why when you go to the doctor, they ask you all that medical history. They want to know because, if it didn't matter, they're not going to ask you. They want to know because, what you saw in your biological parents, you're more likely to experience some of that yourself. And so when they say, phrases like it runs in the family, it really does. And so if your mom, especially, it seems to run on the maternal side, is more at risk for type 2 diabetes, for example, then, so are her offspring and her children. So, maybe just being aware of that can bring more attention to the fact that we really need to watch our blood glucose levels. And we really need to make sure that we're going to the doctor and getting those screenings, just knowing that our parents may have had some of those issues.
Yeah, 100%. And that that actually links to a different thing of like it parents should let their children know that they're going through these things, not because I don't know. I don't want to frame it of like in the way of like, oh, children are entitled to this information. But if they know about this, it could also help with their future. Like you have the right to privacy and all that kind of stuff. But if they're equipped with the right information from the beginning, if they know that this is something that runs in the family history, then they will be equipped with better information. I feel like.
Yeah, no, I think any information that you have, and I totally get what you're saying about privacy. And, sometimes as parents, we don't want our kids to know if we're going through something. I totally get that. But, yeah, especially as they get older, just knowing that these are some things that our family struggles with. And these are some things that, we see a lot in our family. So you really need to be careful with whether it's your, diet or exercise or, depression, addiction, all these sort of things, we see in families. And so being aware of them so we can be more proactive to prevent them.
Yeah. So now that we've talked a lot about the DASH diet, let's talk about some of the habits or activities or exercises that we could be doing to incorporate the DASH diet into our lives. What is something that you recommend practicing?
So you already shut down my idea of not having a salt shaker on the table, but certainly I would say that, flavoring your food with other sorts of spices. And so when my husband and I first got married, and I would cook dinner, and he's a great cook too. He cooks as well. But when I would serve dinner, the first thing he'd do is, put salt on it. I'm like, you haven't even tasted it yet. Like, you don't even know if it needs salt. So why are you salting it? And so we've been married 21 years now. So he's way over that. He knows to taste it first before he puts anything on it. But, you also can look at some of those substitutions, really learn how to look at labels, know sodium. And, in the United States, at least on the nutrition labels, it's about 2,300 milligrams of sodium would be the upper limit of what you need in a day. And so looking at how much you're taking in, there's a lot of really cool apps, websites, different things where you could enter in your foods and it tells you exactly for the day how much you've had. And so do that for a few days, do a typical week of what you eat and then look at your printout to see how much sodium you're really getting, how much, grams of whatever it is you're looking at, but we're talking about DASH diet. So mainly sodium, but if you don't know what you're having, you don't really have that starting point on how to kind of reduce it. And so I think having that kind of baseline is a good idea. And there's so many free apps and so many easy ways where you can just scan barcodes and type things in really quickly and then get a really great visual overview of what you're eating.
Yeah. And how much time do you think that it takes to get this started?
So I think you just start, tomorrow morning for breakfast. You just look and say, what am I eating? And is there something, can I add an extra serving or fruit or vegetable if I'm not already eating that for breakfast? If you're thinking about lunch, thinking about what you could add to your lunch. For example, I'm always thinking about colors. And so we all know that when you add different colors of food to your meal, specifically fruits and vegetables, I'm talking things like red bell peppers versus squash, which is yellow, versus sweet potatoes, all those different colors represent different vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. And so looking at my plate and saying, do I need another color? Do I need something green? Do I need something, I haven't had any yellows or any oranges, those sorts of things. And so just adding a little bit of that. I know that vitamin D, mushrooms are really high in vitamin D. And so I've just figured out ways to put mushrooms in things, in my pasta sauce, when I make omelets, when I make a salad, when I'm stir frying vegetables. I just always keep a little container of mushrooms and try to cut those up and put them in, even though no one just loves mushrooms in my house. When you're adding them to other things, it can really kind of give you that nutrient punch you need without, feeling like you're adding something you don't really like.
Yeah, I really love that perspective. Like when you were talking about the different colors of the veggies, I just start thinking, wow, a chicken pumpkin feta sandwich sounds really good right now. And I never think about using pumpkin. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, you've done
something. I love pumpkin and it's a beautiful color. You can add it, as a sweet, of course in sweets and in baked goods, but also savory. Mm-hmm. I know that there's a local store around here that has a pumpkin hummus around the holidays. And it's delicious.
Wow.
We love pumpkin. I use a lot of canned pumpkin. Again, you don't want like the pumpkin pie filling. You just want the 100% pure pumpkin, which is literally just pureed pumpkin. And I use that in a lot of different dishes. And it's just very good for vitamin C, vitamin A. It's got a lot of really good vitamins for you. And it just feels kind of, special because it's kind of seasonal. Like we use pumpkin when it's fall here in the States a lot. And so it just kind of feels like a treat when you have pumpkin. But yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It has been such a pleasure to pick your brain once again. Now let's move on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about and doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Oh, goodness. I feel like I'm a pretty boring person. And really what I talk a lot about is food because that's kind of my job and that's kind of what I always do. But I do have a lovely husband. I've talked about that. We've been married 21 years. We'll be celebrating our anniversary soon. We're going on an anniversary trip to the Bahamas. We've never been there. That'll be coming up. So anyway, I have a great family. three great kiddos that are just doing amazing things. And so, yeah, I just feel really blessed and really happy to be able to share, with others the things that I like to talk about. And yeah, have a great support system at home.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your anniversary. And second of all, your family sounds wonderful. I personally feel like there's no shame in being boring, although I don't think you're boring at all. I love food. I love talking about food. So this is all really interesting to me. Yeah, I don't think there's anything boring in food at all. Every time we've talked about, well, which is two times now, the two times that we've talked about food have been very interesting to me. So I don't know if that counts for anything, but
Yeah, no, thank you. It's amazing when really what you love kind of comes into, what you do for work. And so I've always loved agriculture and gardening and cooking and canning and food and recipes and culinary type stuff. And so to be able to study that and talk about that on a day-to-day basis is just really a blessing. And yeah, if you ever get me started about food or different cultural foods, I love to talk about, foods from other countries. I love to talk about just anything food related. Like I will not shut up. I will talk
okay.
forever and ever.
Okay, so
And
how
yeah,
about
sometimes you have to tell me to be quiet.
yeah, well, okay, how about for the open mic section? I will ask you to tell me about an unpopular opinion you have about food.
Oh, that's a good question.
Anything is on anything at all. Anything at all is on the floor. It's the open mic. Feel free to share your unpopular opinion.
So I never forced my kids to eat anything. Growing up, if they didn't like it, they just didn't eat it. And so there might be days where they didn't have a piece of fruit. And I didn't feel like I was a bad mom because I know that, your taste buds ebbs and flow, their growth needs ebbs and flows. And so, I just always felt really uncomfortable forcing my kids to eat something. And so I know that that's an unpopular opinion. And sometimes I work with families and they'll tell their kids, you can't leave the table until you eat 3 Brussels sprouts or whatever. I did always encourage my kids to try food, but yeah, I would never make them eat it. And so they knew that there were other options in the house. We always, have fruits or veggies cut up or, some sort of healthy snack if they wanted it. But, when we sit down to eat, if they just absolutely are not feeling asparagus that day, I didn't force them to eat it. And so now they're all older. My youngest is 13. I have 2 teenagers in college now. So they all have a really good palate and they all eat a really good variety of food. And I think that just not forcing them to eat things when they were little and, kind of get that, for lack of a better term, bad taste in their mouth, when you're forcing them to eat something they don't like, I think has really been encouraging them to try new things and like a variety of food. So, yeah, sometimes parents tell me that they think that kids should just, kind of eat what they're served. And I don't always believe that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's so fair just because I feel like there's validity in having children eat whatever is on the table and not having to because sometimes it can be really difficult. I get that. But I think also to your point, giving your children the room to explore what they like and what they don't like, giving them that freedom to not have to eat a fruit when they don't want to allows them to appreciate it a lot better.
Yeah, and I think especially when they're toddlers, they have some other things going on developmentally too, and they want to be independent and they want to make their own decisions. And, they like what they like when they like it. And so, having them just, making them eat grapes, even though they ate grapes yesterday and loved it, and today they just refuse to eat grapes. I'm not going to fight them, They ate other things. They ate other things on the plate. They're still behaving at mealtime. So, it's just sometimes they go through things and they kind of get a little stubborn too. Now, we're not talking about chronically not eating nutritious foods, but yeah, have them try it. If they don't like it, say thank you for trying it and then move on with the day. Like mealtime is not the time to have these drag out fights with your children.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate you coming on with us again, Rachel. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where should they go?
So I think in the show notes, you'll have my LinkedIn. So if you want to talk about food or anything else, you can always contact me there on my LinkedIn profile. But yeah, I'll be happy to connect with anyone.
Amazing. Yes, we'll link those in the show notes. We'll also link the other episode where Rachel and I talked about infant nutrition, introducing solid foods to infants in the show notes as well. So you can go check it out if you wish to listen to us yap a bit more. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.